Here's the new rotors. They got a nice crosshatch pattern on them already. It's just an OEM rotor. Lordco.com, Lordco parts. Hopefully they run okay and don't get any problems with warping or anything. These things are big. If you look at my favorite beer here, that's 2/3 of the can is the width of these rotors. I mean, it's huge. It's big stuff. That's why a 1-ton truck tows a big trailer and a half-ton truck doesn't tow such a big trailer. These things are massive. Well, if you don't have a hoist, you can use a good jack for doing this job. You need at least a 3-ton floor jack. You know, I'm lucky I've got a hoist here. If you don't have the air tools, you can use, you know, any kind of big breaker bar, torque wrench, whatever. That'll get the job done. First thing, we've got to pull the outer cap off here. It's just decorative. And then find the right socket for these guys. There we go. And we got to pull the tire off. Okay. That's better. Okay, so on the last one, you leave on the bottom. You do that one last. Just put your hip against the bottom because the tire will generally try to come out from the bottom first. And it's heavy. These are not light. Okay, that's it. Got the tire off. So before you even get started on doing yours, you have to kind of see what you've got left for the brake linings, and the best way to see it is either in the top of the caliper here on this side or this side, or you can peer through here, but you'll need a flashlight. And you can see on the right side of the disc there's maybe not even a 1/4 inch. On the other side I believe there's a little bit more, but I think the other side's worse than this, so it depends. If you've got one side that's ready to go and the other side's not, you got to do both sets of brakes, so that's just the way it is. Alright, so we'll get started here. First things first, we're going to loosen off the caliper bolts for the caliper slides, which there's one here and one on the bottom here, right there. Okay, that's got to come off first. So to get those bolts off, in this case I'm going to use the impact, but on its lowest power setting. That's just a little quicker. That's the top one. That's the bottom. Okay, once you got those off, you can pretty much pry the caliper out of here. Sometimes it takes a little bit of encouragement. Let's try top and bottom. And just keep working it. Those two hold in the tire caliper. Gonna need a bigger breaker bar in there. Okay, found a bigger toy. I've already pried it loose mostly. There we go. Okay. Now the calipers come off. There's a lot of junk in the pistons. You can see the two pistons here. Those are what push the brake pads. They push the pads against the other side. We can just rest that here. What you don't want to do is put any weight on the brake lines there. Alright? And there's some springs here on the pads. We can pull those off. I actually haven't done Superduty front brakes yet. when I got the truck they had fairly new brakes on there, so you want to save the springs and all the related hardware. Let me just pull these out of here. That's the old shoes. It's still not too bad on that one. This back one here is a little worse. It's already, you can see it's chunking off. There's pieces of the shoe material there, or the pad material coming off. And then there's some springs in the top here. We can just reuse those. And one thing you want to do is don't fool around with brake dust. Even though the newer brake shoes and pads have stuff that has non-asbestos, it's still all kinds of powders that they use to make those brake pads. And so what we want to do next is on the slides here, these two pins, they go back and forth, so as if the caliper needs to move, it's going to be sliding on these two pins. So what you want to do is just pull those things out. You can pull them out like that. You can see there's some grease on there, so what we're going to do is we're going to put some extra grease on there. Okay, so I got some grease, and what you want to do is wipe off the old grease on the end of that sucker and just apply some new stuff. You want to use a lithium based grease. You don't want to use car axle grease or rear axle grease or anything like that. This stuff has to be fairly water soluble, and you just spin it around as you put it in there. You're going to get some grease flying around here and there. Anyway, that's it. We'll wipe off the excess later. We'll do the top one next. And pull that guy out of there. Just wipe it off. You don't need to put too much on there. As long as you got some grease in there, that's good. The stuff that's in there does get fried up a little bit from the high temperatures that are occurring in the brake system in this area. And you got to make sure you pop those little boots on a little bit so that they seal nice. There we go. Okay, so that one's in. And we'll give that a little wipe. What we're going to do next is clean that up here. Now we have to undo a really large bolt here and a large one there. And the size of these guys is 13/16. I think I have a metric somewhere. It's probably metric, but 13/16 fits on there really well. Those two bolts hold on the whole mechanism that the caliper bolts to, and it also retains the disc, so we cannot pull the disc off right now with this in place. So I'll have to pull that off. Okay, now it's time to pull those big bolts off. I can't get the impact in here. It's a little bit tight, and I don't think there's any way to get it in the bottom, so these are taken off manual. And you can use any kind of a large breaker bar. They're usually not stupid tight. If they're really tight, then just get a bigger bar. Okay, that's already loose. Next one. Got to hang on to the bottom as you take that last bolt out. Okay, that's that. Pretty heavy stuff. It only goes on the one way, so there's really no way to screw it up. Okay, now we've got the caliper off, the bracketry off, and basically the rotor is just sitting on there right now. So if you grab a big hammer or whatever, you can smack it, loosen it up, and get off. So I didn't show you the guys apart. I basically hit it all around with a hammer like that, and eventually it'll come loose. There's a heat shield on the back side here that goes all the way around up to about here. So there's no heat shield where the caliper goes. So what you do is you just smack it all around. Just keep smacking it. Eventually it'll come off, and you just pull it forward. Oh, that's really rusted. Yeah, that's from the inside of the rotor. Look at all that junk in there. Okay, so what we want to do now is just clean up this face here a little bit. We're going to use the same, just a tiny bit of the lithium grease inside here everywhere, and it's just that when you get the new rotor on here, the next time you have to pull it off, it's not going to be rusted on here. That sometimes happens. It's really bad on the older style F-150s, the 98 F-150 I used to have. What happened was it would actually rust on this surface and on the front surface, and then because the rust expands, there was no way to get that rotor off. So it's always a good idea to get a little bit of lithies, or you can use, for instance, the Never Cease stuff. Just paint a little bit on there, and that's probably what I use instead of lithium grease, because that's not really that ideal there. You don't want any of this lubricant to spin onto the surface of the disc rotor. Okay, so that's basically all we need to do here right now. We'll get the new rotor on, and then I'll show you how to compress the pistons in the caliper so that we can put the new pads on. Because what happens is when pads are being used up, the pistons, they actually move out further and further and further as the pads get used up and used up and used up. So what you need to do is push those back into their bores, and we're also going to drain some of the old fluid out of there, and then we'll refill with fresh fluid. I'll show you that in a second. So I'll show you guys one of the most important steps when you're putting new brake parts on. You're going to get the rotors, and here's the new rotor. So what you need to do is, these always come with a little bit of an oil coating on them. So you got to lift these bad boys up over a drain or somewhere, and basically get some brakekleen and watch your eyes. Spray that over there, both sides. Okay. Let that drain off. Yeah, it smells a little nasty, but make sure you use new gloves. You don't want to use old gloves that have grease on them. You don't want to get any grease back on the wheel. We're going to rinse it off again after we get it back on the hub, and go from there. Okay, so we've got, it's called Never Cease. It's a combination of, I think, copper powder, a bunch of, it's a gray gooey stuff. You just want to get your finger in there a little bit. Don't use too much. Just spread it around in there. Get a nice little coating of it. And that'll prevent corrosion for the next time you need to pull these guys off. You know, it's only costs a few pennies, and it's well worth having less hassle the next time. Especially on F-150 rotors, they're real bad. Really bad for corrosion. Okay. Okay, then we want to get the new rotor. Get it on there. Make sure you don't touch any part of the face of the rotor with grease or dirty gloves or whatever. There we go. We just want to keep that surface really clean right now. We're going to put the rotor and caliper bracket back on there. You just have to hold the guy straight. They usually go in fairly easy. Okay, that's the top one, just hand tight. Come on, there we go. And the bottom one. Go on. Get the torque wrench in there and tighten those up real good. You really want to tug on these guys. You don't want this stuff coming off, because if this comes off, you've got no brakes and you're hooked. Okay, that's nice and tight for both of those. And then we're ready to put on the caliper. Okay, so we've got the new shoes. They're Ray-Bestis, kind of a performance brand. And we got new springs, so we're going to pop these old springs out of here. And basically you just got to get in there with a screwdriver and just pry it out and they pop off. Fairly easy. And get the new one in, just push it down into place. That's it. There's really not a lot of pressure that holds them in there. Okay, we got the opposite one there. That's the one. There we go. The other side. Come on. And the top one. Okay, that's new springs. It also says in the instructions with the brake pads to put a little bit of lube on there, so go ahead and just a tiny bit on your finger. You don't need a lot in there. You want to just get some on the parts that the shoes are going to slide on. Again, you don't want to get any on the rotor, and I just did there a little bit, so make sure we wash that guy off with brakekleen. And then we're ready for some pads. So as far as the pads go, it's always going to have the shape of the wheel in that orientation. So what goes on the other side of the vehicle is also going to be the same. So essentially just push those in there. They're retained by the springs. They just slide along those guys. Okay, so we just had to play around with the rotor. It was the rotor that was loose. So basically you've got kind of, it's pretty much flush with the brake pads on the edge of the rotor here. The rotor sticks out a tiny bit more than the brake pad material. Okay, so now we're ready for the springs. The purpose of the springs is to push these pads apart. So when you're not on the brakes, these springs go on here and they literally force that apart. And getting them on is going to be a little bit fun. We don't want to have those come apart on us as we're putting the caliper on. Okay, now we got the springs in place. The last thing to go on is the caliper. And unfortunately, somebody has borrowed my caliper piston spreading tool, and I don't have my large pliers here, so I had to get creative. The way to get creative to push these pistons in, normally you can get a piston spreader, and it's basically just two pieces that goes in here, and as you screw it open it pushes against the outside and it forces those pistons back into their bores. Typically you can reuse calipers when you take all of this stuff apart. and you see that one of these pads is worn down to nothing and the other one has lots of meat on it, that generally means there's a problem in the caliper here, and it's best to just get rebuilt calipers, and they're anywhere from 75 to 100 and something a caliper rebuilt. But in any case, try and slide that guy on here. Hopefully there's enough. I've spread it enough. Looks like I'm going to get lucky. Just get it on there. Okay, so I got lucky. I was able to just spread it with my fingers a little bit more to get it enough to get it on there. So what we have left is the two caliper slide bolts here. We've got one at the top, one at the bottom, and you want to try and spin those guys a little bit so that you can get the bolts in there. The back side here does tend to turn, so you can just hold it with your finger, but it is held back by a portion of the caliper so that the back side doesn't turn as you tighten the front. Turn that guy. There we go. Okay, once again with brake parts, when you're tightening up everything, you want to get it good and tight. If you're not sure, look up the torque spec. I'm going to torque those down here, and then we're going to bleed the old fluid out of there. We're just going to do a gravity drain. I'll show you how to do that. And then we're going to clean up the disc one more time before we put the wheel on, and then we'll be done. So you want to have a drain pan underneath. Brakekleen comes in a variety of different flavors. This is gunk. There's 2 or 3 different brands. It's all the same stuff pretty much. You want to hose that off again a little bit. And wherever you got grease, just make sure you get that grease off. You don't want any grease on that disc rotor. Okay, so next we're going to bleed it. Okay, so I'll show you where the brake bleeder is. Here's the brake line. Comes all the way down, right in there on the bolt. There's a copper washer either side. There's the bleeder right there. You can see the bleeder. Okay, so you got to get in this case it's a 10 mil wrench, and you loosen that off and you put a special bleeder hose on there, or you can just literally drain it into a drain pan if you want. It's a vegetable oil based stuff. And you can gravity drain it and clean out the oil that's in the caliper. Okay, so we didn't have any luck with the bleeder, unfortunately. That's what's left of it, a little nub. Busted it right off, and we're gonna have to get a rebuilt caliper now. That's right in there. They probably drill it out and put a new one in. Anyway, so we've got to get some new calipers, and we'll get back on this tomorrow. So we're back at the puzzle here. We've got brand new rebuilt calipers. Real nice looking brand new pistons, everything in there. And a big bag of goodies. And in the bag of goodies we've got new caliper bolts, we've got new caliper slides, we even have the new springs that go in here just in case we need them, and the springs to separate the pads. New rubber boots for the sliders. And then there's a couple of copper washers here. There's a copper washer that sandwiches in the top of this bolt, and another one in the bottom. It's a hollow bolt that lets the brake fluid run through into the caliper, so we'll make a start on that and see how it goes. So we're back at the caliper job. You gotta have a drain underneath. We're going to use a little bit of brake cleaner and compressed air to clean up. There's hardly anything in here. Just want to clean that bolt off. You want to make sure there's no dirt or anything. Generally you don't want to use too much air around brake parts, but in this case you want to get that really clean around here because you don't want any dirt that's around here to get into your new caliper connection. So we're going to get the wrench on there and pull that guy off. Okay, to start we want to get the new caliper ready. Make sure that you have a left and a right caliper. If you mix it up, basically it will bolt up, but your bleeder is going to be at the bottom. So that won't work to bleed the brakes, because the bleeder always has to be at the top to let the air out, and the rest of the compartment fills with the brake fluid from the pipe. So we need to get in there and pull this plastic out. Okay, we've got the new caliper ready to go. We're going to crack the brake line now. And in this case it's a 14 mil, so you can use a socket or whatever. What you got to be ready for is going to be brake fluid leaking out of that line fairly quick. So you want to have the 2 copper washers ready to go, and you want to have your caliper here ready to go. So as soon as we take this off, we're going to try and get it on the new caliper real quick. So you can't fool around. These guys, you can put them on nice and tight, but don't go overboard, because if you go overboard you could strip the threads in there or break off the bolt, because it is a hollow bolt. It lets liquid through. Sometimes it's real hard to get the bolt out of here, because it's actually, that one went really well, because sometimes the copper washers crush right around the bolt. It's dripping away. So you got to get the copper washers off of there. Just pry them off if they want to come off. They're really squished on there. Wow. There we go. That's one. There goes the other one. So we got the washers off now. That's the old ones here. You don't want to reuse those. Use the new ones that came with the kit. Before you start, you want to get any kind of dirt off of there. Okay, then you got to get your bolt ready. You put the first washer on there. You go through the line. Put the second washer on. Try not to drop it anywhere. And grab the caliper, and the hole's right there. Just line it up. Screw it in. Make sure you don't cross thread it or anything. Should thread in by hand for a ways. And make sure that it's lined up in the groove here before you tighten it up. Before you go nuts, just make sure it's in there nice. Caliper is heavy. Okay, nice and tight, not stupid tight, because you will break that off. That's it. Now we've got the new one ready to go. We're going to gravity bleed it a little later. I'll show you how to do that. Now I'm going to pull this old caliper off and put the new one on. Okay, so we've popped the 2 caliper bolts off on the old caliper. Pretty much you just pull off. Being a little bit stubborn. There we go. There's quite a bit of liquid in these guys, so keep it upright. We're in a position that the brake fluid won't go flying out of there. I lost the pin spring here, so I have to put that back. Okay. Now, we're ready for the new caliper. It came with new bolts, so we're going to use the new bolts. And just a straight pop it into place deal. Should fit easier than the old one because the pistons are totally retracted on this new one. The old bolts are still good, but it comes with new ones, so you might as well use them. Okay, that's the top one. Getting slippery with the oil on there. So I just snug them up by hand, and then we use a torque wrench to finish it off. Nice and tight, you don't want this coming off. Okay, we got that done. Okay, hopefully you'll see in the video exactly what's going on here. There's our bleed screw. And I've got this little tube and a device that fits over that. It just basically pops right on there. It's actually not the best fit, but normally you have a container under here, but because we have the drain pan under there, it works just fine to do it that way. So what we want to do is crack this sucker open. And it's going to be pretty tight. Amazingly tight actually for factory. Bloody hell. So we want to open that up and get the hose on there after it's open. It's a good idea to check the reservoir right now. This one has an extremely large reservoir in the Superduty, so I'm not going to worry about doing this caliper. But what happens is right now, because we've got the bleeder open, it's going to gravity drain into the caliper from the brake booster and master cylinder, and eventually the fluid is going to come out of the hose here. And once we see nice clear fluid out of the hose, or relatively clear because we're not we haven't flushed the whole system at this point, and we can close that back up. So this may take a few minutes. Just for the sake of experimenting, we took the hose off and you can see it bubbling there. It's okay to let the fluid run down the side of the caliper. You can clean that off later. You can see it bubbling there out of the bleeder. That's the air still coming out. And the fluid that's coming out there is a little greenish, so we'll wait till we get a solid stream of fluid coming out of there. You can open up quite a bit actually. When the air bubbles stop coming out, that's pretty much when you're done. Here's the bleeder pulled right out. The fluid's draining and they're so slow, and it's such a big caliper that it goes fastest if you just pull it out of there. You can see the bubbling inside the hole as well. So the way the bleeders work is you've got this straight point that seals the hole out of the caliper, and the fluid actually runs through these tiny little holes all the way through the hollow part of the inside of that screw. Okay, you can see now it's just a few bubbles coming out. As soon as there's nothing coming out of there anymore, we'll shut it. A little bit still coming out. So as the last step, once you got all the air out of the calipers, just get a little bit of brake cleaner in there. Too much of this won't hurt anything. And you can do the rotor as well. There we go. So we're pretty much ready to bolt the wheel on now. Now I got to finish the other side. If you want and you have compressed air, there's an optional step. You clean all that solvent off of it. All nice and clean. Okay, now we're ready for the tire and wheel to go on. The wheel actually holds the rotor on here. That's part of what holds it on besides this bracket. Always put the bottom screw on first. And this thing is heavy. There we go. Get your leg in there to hold it on. Put them on by hand first. It's always a good idea. That way you never cross thread them. Don't ask me how I know that. Every mechanic learns that one the first time around. Okay, I'm just going to use the ear wrench here to put them on. It's on the lowest. It's on the absolute lowest setting. We're going to use the torque wrench to get these on here afterwards. You always want to torque your lug nuts properly. Don't use one of these. This is just to get it started. Okay, that's it. Now we're going to do the other side. We're going to get the truck down on the ground. We're going to torque those up. Put the cover on there, and that's it. We're good to go. The only thing we're going to do is I'm going to bleed this with a friend, and basically you just pump the brake pedal, hold it down, tell your assistant to hold it down. You open up the bleeder, let the fluid come out, close the bleeder, let your friend pump it up again, open up the bleeder until you see no bubbles coming out of that bleeder, and then it's perfect. And then you got to top off the master cylinder and you're good to go. There's the passenger side, pretty much finished. Got everything on, just pulled the bleeder out, and it's not coming out of there yet, but will shortly. And just bolt up the wheel and we're done on this side too.
Said to me, and I'm still deeply discovering